3 years ago, I spent 48 hours in the hospital because of something I had done in my own kitchen for decades. I was 86 years old, and the nurse who admitted me looked up from her clipboard and said she sees this in seniors more than almost anything else they treat. It is not a rare disease. It is not a medication mistake. It is something sitting in your refrigerator right now, something most of us have been reheating our whole lives and calling it perfectly fine. If you have leftovers in that kitchen of yours today, friends, stay with me. What I am about to share may be the most important thing you hear all year, and it will cost you nothing to know it. My name is Harold James Callahan. I am 89 years old. I was born in 1937 in a small town in rural Georgia, and I have lived on my own terms every single day since. I cook my own meals every single morning in my own kitchen. I walk 2 miles before the neighborhood wakes up. I tend my own garden. I live alone, and nobody hovers over me. I sleep through the night. I have never needed a nursing home, and I do not intend to need one. I have outlived 3 of my doctors, not a thing I am proud of, but a thing I am honest about. I hold no medical degrees. What I hold is 89 years inside this body, and that may be the only credential that actually matters for what I am about to share with you. The morning after that hospital visit, I want to tell you what it actually felt like, because nobody ever describes these things honestly, and you deserve the truth. I woke up at 2 in the morning with my stomach twisting like something alive in there. Not a little uncomfortable. I mean the kind of pain that makes you sit on the edge of your bed and grip the mattress and wonder if this is how it ends. Not with some grand illness, but with last night's dinner. My legs went weak within an hour. I was sweating through my shirt in a cold house. I sat on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes because I could not trust my own body to stand without the wall behind me. By 4 in the morning, my neighbor had to drive me to the emergency room. Me, a man who walks 2 miles before sunrise every single morning. Me, a man who had not seen the inside of a hospital since 1998. Sitting in a wheelchair, being pushed through those automatic doors at 4 in the morning because of something I ate for dinner the night before. The doctor told me it was Bacillus cereus, bacteria that had been growing inside leftover rice I reheated. He said the toxins were already in the food before I ever turned on the stove. He said reheating it did not help. He said reheating it had made it worse. What shook me most was not the pain. I have known pain. What shook me was the realization that I had been doing this for 30 years. Reheating rice, reheating chicken, reheating potatoes, eggs from the morning eaten again at night. I thought I was being practical, not wasteful, sensible. And every single time I was sitting at my kitchen table trusting food that had already turned against me, and I had absolutely no idea. That was the moment I began paying very close attention to what was actually happening inside the containers in my refrigerator. When I got home from the hospital, I made an appointment with my doctor. He is a decent man, a kind man. He sat across from me and listened to the whole story. And then he said, and I remember his exact words, "At your age, Harold, this is quite common. We can manage it. Manage it." I had spent 48 hours in a hospital bed because of something that happened in my own kitchen, and the answer I was given was to manage it. He wrote me a prescription for something to settle my stomach and told me to be careful with leftovers. That was the entirety of it. No list of which foods, no explanation of why, of what happens inside those foods once they cool down and sit in that refrigerator overnight. Just be careful. I was not willing to accept that. I was not willing to walk back into my own kitchen and call caution a solution. I am 89 years old, and I have been feeding myself since before most of my doctors were born. I needed real information, and I made a quiet, fierce decision that I was going to find it. My neighbor Earl is 77 years old and has not been sick, not once in the 11 years I have known him. Not a cold, not a stomach issue, not a single urgent doctor visit. I had noticed this about him for years, but never thought to ask him directly. One Tuesday afternoon, I walked over and sat on his porch and asked him plainly. I said, "Earl, What is it you are doing differently?" He laughed a slow laugh. He said it was not what he was eating, it was what he was not reheating. He told me he had spent years studying food safety, not because he was a scientist, but because his wife had gotten severely ill from reheated food, and he had made a quiet decision that it would never happen in his kitchen again. He had read everything he could find, and over the course of 3 separate Tuesday afternoons on that porch together, he walked me through every single thing he had learned. The first food Earl talked about was rice. I almost laughed when he said it. Rice. I had been eating rice my whole life. Born in Georgia, rice on the table 3 times a week growing up. I told him that, and he nodded slowly and said, "Harold, that is exactly what concerns me. Here is what most people do, and I did it too for 30 years. You cook a pot of rice. You eat what you need. You set the pot on the counter to cool. Maybe you cover it, maybe you do not. An hour later, sometimes 2 or 3 hours later, you put it in the refrigerator. And you believe it is safe now because it is cold. That cooling window is where the danger lives." Earl explained it simply. Raw rice carries spores of a bacteria called Bacillus cereus. Cooking the rice does not kill these spores, it makes them go quiet. But when that rice sits at room temperature, even for an hour, even covered, those spores wake up, multiply, and begin producing toxins. And this is the part that changes everything. Those toxins survive reheating. You can bring the rice to a full boil. Those toxins will still be there. The heat that kills the bacteria cannot touch what the bacteria already left behind. The CDC estimates Bacillus cereus causes over 63,000 confirmed cases of food poisoning in the United States every single year. I was one of them. I did not know I was at risk. I did not know the risk even had a name. The right way, according to food safety guidelines, refrigerate cooked rice within 1 hour of cooking. 1 hour? Not when it feels cool enough? Not when you remember to deal with it. 1 hour? When you reheat it, make sure it reaches 165 degrees throughout, steaming from the inside out, not just warm on top. Reheat it only once. If it has been in the refrigerator for more than 1 day, do not question it. Let it go. Within 1 week of changing this single habit, I stopped carrying a low-level anxiety every time I sat down to a reheated dinner. That feeling had been with me for years. I had just been calling it something else. But what comes next surprised me even more, and it is a food that almost every senior I know reheats without a second thought. Earl mentioned chicken second. He paused before he said it, a pause long enough that I knew I was not going to like what followed. I told him I had been eating reheated chicken since 1965. He said, "I know. That is how long this has been working against you. Here is what most people do. I did this myself for years. You take leftover chicken out of the refrigerator. You put it in the microwave for 2 or 3 minutes. The outside is hot. The inside, particularly the thicker parts, the center of the breast, the deepest part of the thigh, is still cold. And that cold center is precisely where Salmonella and Campylobacter can survive. The microwave heats unevenly. It always has, and it always will. And most of us do not own a food thermometer, which means we have no way of knowing whether the center of that piece of chicken actually reached a temperature safe to eat. The USDA food safety guidelines are unambiguous. Reheated chicken must reach 165 degrees Fahrenheit throughout, not on the surface, not near the outside, throughout. The right way: reheat chicken on the stovetop or in the oven whenever possible. Low heat, slow and steady, covered. If the microwave is your only option, cover the chicken to trap the steam, rotate it halfway through, and use a food thermometer to confirm the center temperature before you eat it. Not before you think it is done, before you eat it. Here is what the USDA also makes clear. Adults over 65 are among the highest risk groups for serious salmonella complications. Not because we are fragile, because our immune systems are doing more work than they were at 40, and they deserve every advantage we can give them. 3 weeks after I started reheating chicken properly, Checking temperatures, using the stove, something in my digestion settled. A heaviness after meals that I had been calling my age. Some of it, it turns out, was the chicken. Stay with me, because the next food on this list is one I never would have suspected on my own. Baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, roasted potatoes. I have made all of them my entire life. And Earl told me they were the most quietly dangerous food on this list for a reason that almost no one ever hears about. He asked me how I stored a leftover baked potato. I told him honestly, sometimes I left it in the foil on the counter to cool, and then put it in the refrigerator an hour later, still wrapped. He shook his head slowly. He said, "Harold, the foil is the problem. Here is what most people do. They bake a potato wrapped in foil, eat half, wrap the remaining half back in that same foil, set it on the counter to cool because that seems careful, responsible. Clean. It is not. The FDA has documented cases of botulism, a serious illness caused by Clostridium botulinum bacteria, linked specifically to baked potatoes stored in foil while cooling at room temperature. The foil creates a low oxygen environment around the potato as it cools. That low oxygen space is precisely the condition this bacteria needs to produce its toxin. And unlike most foodborne bacteria, botulinum toxin produces no smell, no color change, no warning of any kind. You cannot see it. You cannot smell it. You cannot tell it is there. For seniors, this matters even more. Botulism affects the nervous system, and recovery in older adults is significantly harder and longer than in younger people. The right way: remove the foil immediately after baking. Let the potato cool briefly, no longer than 2 hours, then refrigerate it unwrapped or in an open container. When reheating, make sure it is steaming all the way through before you eat it. Not warm, steaming. 2 months after I changed how I stored and reheated potatoes, a particular heaviness I felt after my midday meal began to lift. I had been calling it my age for years. Earl said it may have been the foil all along. Now here is the part one have kept mostly to myself until today. Eggs were the hardest thing for Earl to explain to me, and the hardest for me to accept. My family kept hens until I was 74. I have eaten eggs every single morning of my life. Earl told me he was not asking me to stop eating eggs. He was asking me to stop reheating them the way I had always reheated them. Here is what most people do. I did both of these things for years. In the morning, you scramble more than you need, cover the pan, and eat the rest warmed up at lunch or the following day. Or you hard-boil a batch at the beginning of the week, and then one morning you decide to warm one up quickly in the microwave before sitting down, still in the shell. Friends, please stop doing that last thing. A hard-boiled egg reheated in the microwave in its shell can explode. The shell prevents steam from escaping, pressure builds inside, and the FDA has documented injuries from exactly this. For an 89-year-old man reaching into a microwave, that is not an inconvenience. That is a genuine danger. Beyond the physical risk, the FDA places adults over 65 among the highest risk groups for serious salmonella complications from improperly reheated eggs. The proteins in reheated eggs also become harder to digest the second time around, something my body now tells me clearly enough that I no longer need to be told twice. The right way is simple. Cook what you plan to eat at that meal. If you have leftover scrambled eggs, reheat them gently on the stovetop over low heat with a splash of water, stirring slowly until steaming throughout. If reheating a hard-boiled egg, remove the shell first, slice it, and warm it briefly in a covered pan. Never whole, never in the shell, never in the microwave. Within a month of changing how I handled eggs, my mornings felt different, lighter. I got up without that low, dull weight in my stomach I had been explaining away as the price of being 89. It was not my age. It was how I had been handling breakfast my entire life. Now, I need to stop talking about food for a moment, because there is something I want to share with you that took me longer to understand than anything Earl ever taught me on that porch, and I would not feel right leaving this conversation without saying it. About 30% of what keeps a person healthy at my age is what they put into their body, what they reheat and what they do not, how they store the food, the temperatures and the timing. All of it matters, and I want you to take every word of this seriously. But 70%, the other 70%, is something that has never appeared in a food safety guideline. Nobody has ever tried to sell it to you in a bottle, and you will not find it in any refrigerator. When my wife Dorothy passed in the winter of 2017, I did everything right. I kept walking my 2 miles every single morning. I kept tending the garden. I kept cooking my meals from scratch, watching what I stored and how long it had been there. From the outside, I was a man taking care of himself. But inside, I was hollow. I would sit in my chair after dinner in a house that had been built for 2 people, and I genuinely could not tell you what I was waiting for. I had the routine, I had the health, and none of it felt like it was pointing anywhere. 8 months of doing everything right, and still feeling like I was slowly disappearing, not from illness, from the quiet belief that nobody particularly needed me anymore, that the person I had been most useful to was gone, and I had not figured out yet who else needed what I had left to give. The thing that changed it was not something I planned. My neighbor's grandson knocked on my door one Saturday morning. He was 9 years old, and his name was Marcus, and his mother had sent him over to ask if I would teach him how to grow tomatoes. I spent 3 hours in the garden with that boy. When he left, I went inside, sat down in my chair, and for the first time in 8 months, I did not ask myself why I had gotten up that morning. I want to be honest with you about what I learned from that. Purpose is not a luxury at this age. It is not a pleasant extra. Research from Harvard Health has found that social engagement and a genuine sense of meaning are directly associated with longer health span and reduced cognitive decline in older adults. Your body is not only processing food, it is processing whether or not it has a reason to continue doing the work. I write letters now. Not emails, actual letters, by hand to people who are not expecting them. I sit with Earl on Tuesday afternoons, even when there is nothing new to say. I teach anyone who will stand still long enough in my garden. I am needed. And that, more than the rice, more than the chicken, more than the potatoes and the eggs, may be the real reason I am still here. On my own terms, at 89. Your body wants to heal. It is remarkably resilient, more forgiving than you have been told. But it needs to believe the healing is for something. Friends, if you know someone whose mornings start with leftovers pulled from the refrigerator before they are even fully awake, share this with them. It may matter more than you know. Leave your first name and age in the comments below. I read every single one. I want to know who is out there, and tell me one person, just one, you are going to reach out to today. A letter. A phone call, a knock on a door you have been meaning to knock on for a while now. Tell me who it is. We are not done talking yet. This is my personal experience after 15 years of paying close attention to what goes into this body. Always speak with your doctor before making any changes to your health routine.